Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Today I wanted to show you the third section in our Heady-esque weave design series of tutorials, and what I want to show you today is how to make smaller components. Now I'm not going to be showing you with very tiny stones, but you can absolutely size this design down. So it's a very simple housing covering as little as possible over the front surface of the gemstone. And you can then use multiple pieces like this in your Heady-esque designs. So last week we showed you how to do the coiling and how to cut those into shorter segments, and the week before that we were looking at creating the backs and bases. Next week I'm hoping to show you how to draw it all together so that you can crack on and do your own take on the Heady-esque style of pendant design. So what I'm going to be using today is 0.6mm gauge raw copper wire, and I'm only using for these gemstones, which are about 20 to 25mm in length, so just under an inch or so. I'm using around about 9 inches of my 0.8mm gauge raw copper. Now I'm going to give that a really lovely warm through so it's nice and flexible before we start working with it. So if I show you what we're working towards, this is the kind of design we're going to create. So there is very minimal coverage over the front surface. You could pull that out even further to show as much as possible, especially when you're working with smaller pieces. You don't want too much of that hidden by the wire that's holding it together, because you just want to kind of have fanciful moments with your gizmoed work instead. So on the back of the design I've added a little bit of net using a short amount of 0.4mm gauge wire, and what you'll notice is that this is a very open design. When we come to put everything together, you'll see why it's beneficial to have all of these access points. You've got a little loop on one end and a little loop on the other end, and that is to enable you to link them together before you pop them on the frame if you need to do that. You could even use this in bracelet design, but to be honest I wouldn't probably do that, because this is going to need more layers over the top to make it 100% secure. So here is the book matched gemstone. It's the same size and shape as the one that I have in my left hand. So without further ado, let's get cracking and show you how we're going to create this. So if we come over to the side, first thing I'm going to do is generate a bit of an open coil. So my first segment is a complete loop, and I want to add a little bit of strength to that section. It's always going to be worth adding a little bit of strength to these loops and coils, because you don't really want them to come undone whilst you're working with them as you go. So I'm just going to press and release that a few times just so that you can get a little bit of rigidity to it. And I'm going to, by hand, just create a bit of an open coil. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. This is going to be on the back of the gemstone that we're looking at, and in the end it's going to be covered by multiple layers of wire anyway. So if you flip your gemstone over, this has got a bit of mounting stick to it, but I'm not going to worry about that for the moment. I'm just going to allow that loop to sit approximately centrally, as if it was the iris of a dragon's eye. And then what I want to do is start bringing the gemstone into position and find one of the, if you're working with an oval, it would be one of the longitudinal points here, so one end to the other end. But what I want to create is a little wrapped loop, so I'm going to measure that with my thumb to hold on to it, come in with my round nose pliers and make quite a small loop. I don't want it to be oversized because I haven't decided how exactly I'm going to use this in the design later. I'm going to grip hold of that little single loop that we've created and take that tail of wire all the way around. We've made a very secure loop there, and I'm pushing the wire up towards where the pliers are just to make sure that it doesn't take up too much space. So you can see that that loop, the central coil, I beg my pardon, is in the middle there. And what we want to do is take the wire, I'm going to flip the whole thing over. We're going to take this tail of wire so that it sits around what would essentially be the girdle if this was a faceted gem. So around the outside of the entire gemstone, bringing that down to the opposite point to where we created the first loop. Going to do exactly the same again. Just pop the gemstone out of position using my thumbnail to measure that point, and again a little loop. Draw that underneath. You can swap the pliers over if it makes your life easier. And then again, grip hold of the loop, whilst we add a wrap around like so, and then the wire continues in the same direction as it was already going. So the reason that I'm creating a little tram line, I suppose, of wire around the outside, almost like a bezel setting, is to capture the body of the gemstone. Underneath we've got the coil, and we will put a little zigzag of finer gauge wire to prevent the gemstone from going through, and then over the top of the gem we're going to have a couple of passes of wire tied around those loops. I'm going to continue to show you that now. So I'm just going to make sure that my small loops on either end are exactly where I want them to be, and that everything is nice and flat. So pop the gemstone back on top and continue to draw the wire around back to the first loop that we created. And I'll flip that over to show you what it's looking like. Just making sure that our wire is going around the girdle effectively of the gemstone. This is a faceted front and a flat back cab. Now you can move that coil out of the way if it's getting on your nerves. It doesn't need to be completely central, it's just a nice place to start. So you can see that we've created almost like a bezel around that girdle. Hold your loops into position, and then we're going to wrap around the first loop that we created. So you may feel like you need to be octopus fingers, but once you've done it a couple of times it's all good. We're going to take that tail around the loop and continue on in the same direction. So that's why it pays us to get those loops nice and secure to begin with. So your first strand of wire has gone around the outer edges, or the girdle of the design, of the gemstone rather, and you've got that coil sitting on the back, which we will do something to a little bit later. At the moment we're working on the face of the gem, so I'm going to grip hold of that really firmly and just add some extra heat into the tail of wire. As we've been working, it's hardened up a little bit. What I want to do now is take this very slim margin around just the very edge of the gemstone there, and I want to hold that in position. Now if you were going to use this as a link in a bracelet, for instance, you may wish to consider adding some further structural wires, such as a zigzag back and forth, just to stop the gemstone popping out of the side in this juncture. It could theoretically slip out, but once it's layered up in your multiple gemstone piece, such as this Heady-esque design, you've got so many bits and pieces going on that those gemstones have got nowhere to go. So we're going to take the wire and wrap that around that loop that we've created. So I'm going to push that down onto the surface of the gemstone, take the tail all the way around, and I'm going to keep it as close over the gemstone as I can, like so. And then we're going to repeat so that we have got the front of the gemstone captured on two sides, like so, all the way around to the opposite loop. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing, take that all the way around, nice and firm with that pushing. You can give that a bit of a squish if you need to. If things go a little bit awry, then what you can do is poke the tail through that loop if you prefer. I'm just going to draw that across the back for now and turn that into a very tiny loop just to tidy it out of the way. So with those round nose pliers, I'm just going to draw that around, careful not to scratch your gemstone, like so, and push it down against the gem. So what we're working with, you can see that's come a little bit loose, so I'm just going to tidy that away like so and give it a squeeze. So you can see what we have is the gemstone is captured around its edges, and it has these two little lines going across the surface. Now to stop the gem from escaping at the back, we're going to work with a short length of 0.4mm gauge. Again, I will put gauge alternatives in the description beneath the video when I upload to YouTube, so that hopefully you'll be able to understand when I say 0.4, the gauge that is relevant to you where you are in the world. So it's only a short length of 0.4mm gauge that I have here. What I'm going to do is pull that initial coil that we created away from the back for a moment. I'm just going to pass the wire around that a couple of times, once and twice. I've started in the middle of my short piece of 0.4mm gauge because it means that I can show you very quickly how to attach this all together. So I'm going to draw the tail of my wire up to, let's call it the girdle wire, the thing that's acting as the bezel around the gemstone. Just going to post that around so that it connects quite firmly. And I'm going to wrap twice around that girdle wire or bezel. I just need to post that through. It doesn't want to do it because I would quite like it to do it. So let's just try that from a different angle. There we go. Take the tail through and pull that until it's nice and square, nice and even in the wrapping. So you can just zigzag backwards and forwards. So I would go from here to here, back to the coil, up to the top. I'd integrate this little loop that we created earlier, and I'll show you exactly what I did with the other piece. So I've zigzagged from the coil to the outer margin, coil, outer, all the way around the edges of that bezel wire, connecting it to the coil, and I've even integrated that little tiny loop that we created at the end. And what you have here is a component that you can use in your multiple gemstone pieces or your Heady inspired designs like this, and then once you layer that up underneath, you'll be able to see quite a large amount of the surface of the gemstone. You're not losing too much of the surface, but you have enough of a hold onto the gemstone for it to be nice and secure. So once you've built that up with loads of bits of gizmo wire, then I'm sure that will look absolutely fantastic. I do look forward to joining you again in the future. Any specific requests that you have for tutorials, please do let me know, and I hope to see you again in the future. Bye for now.